"We can't do this right now." The phrase came over the phone so calmly, as if I'd asked not for help but for some awkward favor. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, and phone in my hand, staring at the phone screen, where notifications appeared one after another, delivered, seen, and not a single answer. An hour before, the doctor had said my test results were bad. That the treatment would be long. That I'd need support. I called my mom first. Then my sister. Then my brother. No one came. My mom called back later and said she was too tired, my sister wrote that she can't handle the negativity, and my brother simply sent a message, "We're not ready to take this on right now." As if my illness were a suitcase without a handle. When I was discharged that evening, the nurse asked who would be picking me up. I said nothing. The hallway was noisy, people were laughing, talking, hugging. And I stood there with a bag of medications in my hands and suddenly realized, I no longer had a family, at least not the one I'd counted on. I walked toward the exit alone. And that's when it dawned on me, they'd already made their choice. No fighting. No yelling. They simply cut me out of their lives the moment I became inconvenient. And that was only the beginning. The doctor didn't soften it. He sat across from me with my chart open, tapping a pen against the folder like he was bracing himself more than I was. Then he said the words I'd been half expecting and fully dreading. Chronic. Aggressive. Unpredictable. He explained treatment plans, timelines, possible side effects, but his voice blurred into a low hum as one thought kept looping in my head, "This isn't going away." I nodded like I understood, like I was being told about someone else's body. Inside, I was panicking. I asked the practical questions, work, insurance, mobility, but what I really wanted to ask was something much simpler, who was going to help me through this? When I walked out of that office, the hallway felt too long, too bright. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel for almost 20 minutes before turning the key. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was still in survival mode, still believing that once my family knew how serious this was, they'd show up. That this was the kind of thing families rally around. But that night, alone in my apartment, the fear finally settled in. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my chest. I was scared of losing my health, scared of losing my independence, and terrified of becoming a burden. I kept thinking, if I'm struggling this much now, what happens when it gets worse? That was when I realized the diagnosis wasn't just about my body, it was about everything else it was about to expose, how fragile my safety net really was, and how alone I might have to be to survive this. At first, I told myself I just needed to be clear. That maybe I hadn't explained things well enough the first time. So I tried again, more carefully, more calmly, choosing my words like they could somehow make my illness easier for other people to hear. I sent a long message to my mom, explaining the diagnosis, the treatment plan, how exhausted I already felt. I didn't ask for anything dramatic. Just help getting to appointments. Someone to check in. Someone to sit with me when the nights got too long. Her reply came hours later, "I don't know what you expect us to do." I called my sister next. She sighed before I even finished speaking. Told me she was overwhelmed with her own life, that she didn't have the emotional capacity for this right now. She suggested I try meditation. Or journaling. As if I hadn't already been doing both just to get through the day. My brother didn't call at all. He texted instead. Short, clipped sentences. He said I was stressing everyone out. That constantly talking about my health was bringing the mood down. He ended with, "You've always been strong. You'll figure it out." That one hurt the most. Not because it was cruel, but because it sounded like encouragement. Like a compliment. As if being strong meant I wasn't allowed to need anyone. By the end of the week, I stopped reaching out. Not because I didn't need help, but because every unanswered message and every dismissive reply made something inside me shrink. I realized I wasn't just asking for support anymore, I was asking for permission to be sick. And my family had already decided they didn't want to grant it. Once I stopped reaching out, the distance didn't feel sudden anymore. It became patterned. Predictable. Every interaction followed the same script, polite concern on the surface, quiet avoidance underneath. My mom would text things like, "How are you feeling today?" But if I answered honestly, the conversation would end there. No follow-up. No questions. Just silence. When I mentioned an upcoming treatment, she replied with, "Let's talk about something lighter." As if my reality was an inappropriate topic. My sister mastered the art of being busy. Every time I suggested meeting, she already had plans. Work deadlines. Social commitments. Rain check became her favorite phrase. Weeks passed without a single concrete date. I started to realize she wasn't overwhelmed, she was uncomfortable. And avoiding me was easier than facing what I was going through. My brother's distance was colder. He framed it as logic. He said focusing on my illness was counterproductive, that negativity could make things worse. He suggested I keep updates to a minimum so the family could stay normal. Normal, apparently, meant pretending nothing was wrong, as long as it wasn't happening to them. What hurt most was how reasonable their excuses sounded. No yelling. No outright rejection. Just a steady withdrawal wrapped in concern. They weren't abandoning me loudly. They were doing it quietly, carefully, in ways that made me feel guilty for noticing. I began to understand something unsettling. They weren't incapable of supporting me. They were choosing not to. My illness didn't fit into the version of family they preferred, one that was convenient, cheerful, and undemanding. And instead of adjusting, they stepped back and waited for me to disappear. The loneliest moment wasn't when I got the diagnosis. It wasn't even when my family stopped answering. It was a Tuesday night, weeks into treatment, when the pain spiked so suddenly that I had to sit down on the bathroom floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. I remember staring at my phone, scrolling through my contacts, thumb hovering over names I knew by heart. Mom. Sister. Brother. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't need advice. I just wanted someone to stay on the line with me until the shaking passed. Someone to remind me I wasn't alone in my own body. I didn't call. I already knew how it would go. The sigh. The awkward pause. The subtle irritation that I was interrupting their evening. So instead, I pressed my forehead against the cool tile and waited it out by myself, counting my breaths like the nurse had taught me. Later that night, lying in bed, I checked social media. My sister had posted a photo at a dinner party, smiling brightly. My mom had shared a quote about staying positive. My brother had liked both posts. The world kept moving, loudly and cheerfully, without me. That was the moment it finally settled in, not as panic, but as clarity. I wasn't temporarily alone. I was inconveniently alone. My pain didn't inspire urgency or care, it inspired distance. And if I wanted to survive this, I couldn't keep expecting rescue from people who had already chosen comfort over compassion. I turned my phone face down and cried quietly, not because I was sick, but because I understood something irreversible had broken. Whatever version of family I thought I had, whatever safety I believed existed, was gone. And I was the only one who seemed to notice. The shift was subtle at first. It started with questions that sounded like concern but landed like accusations. "Are you sure it's really that bad?" my mom asked one afternoon, her voice careful, almost rehearsed. When I tried to explain, she interrupted with, "You've always been sensitive." My sister took a different approach. She told me I was focusing too much on the negative, that constantly talking about my illness was probably making it worse. She said stress can manifest physically, like that explained everything. When I mentioned how alone I felt, she laughed softly and said, "You're reading into things." My brother was the most direct. He told me I was pushing people away. That my expectations were unrealistic. "Everyone has problems," he said. "You're not the only one struggling." He suggested that maybe if I were more positive, people would want to be around me again. It took me a while to understand what was happening. Every time I brought up my pain, they reframed it as a flaw in my personality. Every time I expressed hurt, they treated it like an overreaction. Slowly, the narrative shifted, from they aren't showing up to I'm the reason they can't. I started questioning myself. Wondering if I really was too much. If asking for help was selfish. If needing support meant I was weak. That doubt settled deeper than any physical symptom ever had. What hurt most wasn't just being abandoned, it was being told, again and again, that my abandonment was my fault. And once I saw that clearly, something inside me hardened. Not into anger, but into resolve. Because if they needed to believe I was the problem to feel comfortable walking away, then no explanation from me would ever be enough. After that, I stopped explaining. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a speech or draw a boundary out loud. I just went quiet. No updates. No emotional check-ins. No carefully worded messages trying to make my pain sound manageable enough for them to tolerate. At first, the silence felt unnatural, like holding my breath underwater. I kept expecting someone to notice. To ask why I'd gone quiet. To finally step forward. But days passed, then weeks, and no one did. The absence of concern said more than any argument ever could. So I started watching instead. I noticed how easily they filled the space I left. Family group chats continued without me. Photos were posted. Holidays were planned. My illness became something unspoken, like an embarrassing topic everyone silently agreed to avoid. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more comfortable they seemed. What surprised me was how much clearer everything became once I stopped talking. Without my explanations, their behavior stood on its own. There were no misunderstandings. No crossed wires. Just choices. I realized I'd been doing emotional labor my entire life, softening truths, managing discomfort, making myself smaller so others wouldn't feel guilty. Silence took that burden away. In the quiet, I could finally see them as they were, not as I hoped they might be. And in that observation, something shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping they'd change. I was learning. Carefully, calmly. Taking mental notes about who showed up when nothing was required, and who disappeared the moment it was. That silence wasn't empty. It was information. And once I understood that, I knew I would never unsee it again. Once I stopped hoping, the truth stopped hurting as much. It became factual. Clean. Almost clinical. I watched how people behaved when there was nothing to gain from kindness, when no one was watching, when compassion required effort instead of words. I noticed how my mom only reached out when she wanted reassurance that she wasn't a bad parent. How my sister's concern appeared exclusively in public comments, never in private messages. How my brother spoke about resilience as long as it wasn't his turn to practice it. None of it was dramatic. That was the point. It was ordinary. Consistent. Real. I used to believe that love showed up automatically in moments of crisis. That blood meant something deeper than convenience. But illness stripped all of that down. It removed performance. What remained were habits. Priorities. Limits people didn't even know they had until I crossed them by getting sick. And here was the hardest part to accept: they weren't villains. They weren't evil. They were just unwilling. Unwilling to be uncomfortable. Unwilling to sit with fear that wasn't theirs. Unwilling to give without knowing when it would end. Accepting that didn't make me bitter. It made me honest. I stopped rewriting their behavior to protect them. I stopped inventing reasons for their absence. I let their actions stand exactly as they were. And in doing so, I finally released myself from the need to be understood by people who had already decided not to see me. That acceptance wasn't loud or empowering. It was quiet. Heavy. And strangely relieving. Because once I accepted who they were, I could stop asking myself why I wasn't enough to make them stay. Recovery didn't look like a montage. It looked like quiet mornings and very small victories. It looked like learning how to manage my medication schedule by myself, setting alarms, tracking side effects, adjusting when my body refused to cooperate. No one reminded me. No one checked in. I became my own safety net. Therapy started shortly after. Once a week, I sat across from someone who didn't rush me, didn't minimize, didn't change the subject when things got uncomfortable. For the first time, I said out loud how abandoned I felt, and no one told me I was being dramatic. That alone felt like progress. I built routines because chaos made everything worse. Morning walks when I had the energy. Simple meals. Early bedtimes. On the hard days, just showering counted as success. I stopped measuring myself by productivity and started measuring by persistence. Showing up, even imperfectly, became enough. Work was complicated. I couldn't perform the way I used to, and I had to accept that. I negotiated flexibility. I learned to ask for accommodations without apologizing. Strangely, strangers treated me with more understanding than my own family ever had. There were nights when the loneliness hit hard, when I wished, just for a moment, that someone would ask how my appointment went. But those moments passed. And in their place grew something sturdier than hope. Self-trust. I was rebuilding a life without the people I thought were essential to it, and day by day, I realized I wasn't falling apart without them. I was learning how to stand. Something shifted quietly, without celebration. I noticed it the first time a bad day didn't send me spiraling. My symptoms flared, plans fell apart, and instead of panicking or reaching for my phone, I adjusted. I rested. I moved on. The urgency to be rescued was gone. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining what I should have said to make them care. That version of me was tired. The new one conserved her energy. Peace became practical, not poetic. I learned how to sit with discomfort without treating it like an emergency. Therapy helped, but so did repetition, choosing myself again and again when no one else did. I got better at noticing my limits and honoring them without guilt. Saying I can't stopped feeling like failure and started feeling like honesty. Emotionally, I grew steadier. I didn't need constant reassurance anymore. My worth stopped depending on whether someone showed up or replied. I trusted my own read of situations. If something felt unsafe or dismissive, I didn't debate it. I stepped back. Independence didn't make me cold. It made me clear. I still wanted connection, but not at the cost of my health, my dignity, or my sanity. I wasn't building walls. I was building a spine. For the first time, I felt grounded in myself. Not because life was easy, but because I finally believed I could handle it, whatever came next. Stability didn't arrive all at once. It came in patterns. Fewer bad days in a row. Doctor visits that ended with cautious optimism instead of warnings. Medication that finally settled instead of fighting my body. I stopped bracing myself every morning, waiting for everything to collapse. My health wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, and that felt like freedom. I could plan again. Small things at first. A weekend commitment. A short trip. Saying yes without immediately calculating how much it would cost me physically. My body still had limits, but it was no longer my enemy. Work began to shift too. With accommodations and honesty, I found a rhythm that didn't punish me for being human. I took on projects I could manage, and to my surprise, I was good at them. Reliable. Thoughtful. My confidence grew, not because I was proving anything, but because I finally saw my value clearly. Outside of work, my life filled in quietly. New friendships formed without drama or pressure. People who didn't need explanations, who respected boundaries without questioning them. I laughed more. Not the forced kind, real laughter that caught me off guard. There was space in my life now. Space that used to be filled with worry, disappointment, and waiting. I didn't feel healed, but I felt alive again. And for the first time in a long while, my future didn't feel fragile, it felt possible. It started with a message from my mother. "We've been meaning to check in. We were worried about you." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to locate the worry she claimed to feel, somewhere between the months of silence and the unanswered calls. It didn't add up. Then my sister texted. "You kind of disappeared. Are you okay?" As if I'd slipped away quietly, not been left behind loudly. As if hospital rooms and unanswered voicemails hadn't existed. The rewriting was subtle, almost impressive. A few days later, an invitation appeared. A family gathering. Casual. No acknowledgement of the past. No mention of the illness, the absence, the nights I spent alone wondering if I mattered. Just a vague warmth, like nothing had ever gone wrong. They spoke in generalities. That was a hard time for everyone. We didn't know how bad it was. "You should have told us you needed help." I read the words and felt strangely calm. Not angry. Not hopeful. Just observant. They weren't reaching out because they understood. They were reaching out because I was stable again. Because it was safe now. The crisis had passed, and with it, their discomfort. I realized something then: their return wasn't proof of love. It was proof of timing. And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled toward them. I felt steady where I was. They wanted phone calls now. Long ones. Catch-ups. Details. My mother asked about my health in a careful, rehearsed way, like she was following a script. My sister suggested we start fresh, as if closeness were a switch we could flip back on without consequence. I noticed how the balance had shifted. They leaned in, I stayed where I was. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I answered politely, briefly. I didn't overshare. I didn't fill silences. I no longer felt responsible for making them comfortable. There was a time when their attention would have meant everything to me. I would have taken it in any form, even diluted, even late. Now it felt optional. I listened to myself more than to them. If a call drained me, I ended it. If a message stirred old anxiety, I waited before responding, or didn't respond at all. They seemed confused by my calm distance. One of them joked that I'd become hard to read. Another said I'd changed. They were right. I had. But not in the way they implied. I wasn't withholding affection. I was protecting stability. I wasn't punishing them. I was choosing myself. For the first time, closeness wasn't something I chased. It was something I evaluated. And strangely, not needing them anymore was the most honest relationship we'd ever had. I didn't announce my boundaries. I didn't deliver a speech or demand accountability. I simply adjusted my access. Limited contact. Short conversations. Neutral topics. No emotional labor. It was quieter than confrontation, and far more effective. When they asked why I wasn't around as much, I didn't justify myself. I said I was focusing on my health. That I needed consistency. That I didn't have the capacity for unpredictability anymore. I let the explanations end there. The right people don't need footnotes. There was pushback, of course. Confusion framed as concern, guilt dressed up as worry. "We're family," they said, as if that erased history. As if biology obligated me to reopen wounds. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my choices. I stayed steady. Distance didn't mean bitterness. It meant peace. My nervous system settled. My days felt lighter. I slept better knowing I wouldn't be pulled back into dynamics that once cost me my health. I learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. They let in what's safe and keep out what isn't. I still loved them in a quiet, detached way. From afar. Without expectations. Without hope for change. And that was enough. Choosing myself didn't make me selfish. It made me well. Illness doesn't just test the body. It reveals the truth about the people around you. When everything is easy, love looks abundant. When things get hard, it becomes precise. Some stay. Some disappear. And that knowledge, once learned, can't be unlearned. Being abandoned when I was most vulnerable broke something in me, but it also stripped away illusions. I stopped chasing approval from people who only loved me when I was convenient. I learned that needing help doesn't make you weak. Being denied it doesn't make you unworthy. If you were left alone in a hospital room, on a bathroom floor, or in the quiet after a diagnosis, please know this: their absence is not a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their capacity. You don't need to shrink your pain to make others comfortable. You don't need to heal loudly to prove you survived. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is build a life that doesn't include the people who failed you. Not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself. Peace is not reconciliation. Closure doesn't require permission. I exist now without needing to be seen by them. I am healthy enough, strong enough, whole enough on my own. And if love returns, it will have to meet me where I stand, not where I once begged to be.